Good morning, everyone. Dan Bates, President and CEO, Greater Hamilton Chamber of Commerce. We're glad you could join us this morning in Coffee and Conversations. We're going to be hearing from Sydney Taske in just a little bit about your retirement options with your employer. So that money that you've been putting aside, what should you do with it? So she's going to give you some direction on your options. And we are on Zoom. So if you have any questions, I'm sure that Sydney won't mind if you interrupt her with those questions. If you're on Facebook Live, type your questions in and we will try to get them answered for you. So with that, that's the protocol. And I'm turning it over, I guess, to Tiffany to do self-introductions.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tiffany Grubb, Director of Marketing with Hamilton Chamber. I'm just going to go around my screen and call on you, say what your name is and the company you represent. And we will start with Cindy.
Hi, everybody. I'm Cindy Keitel with Keitel Business Coaching. Good morning.
Yeah.
I couldn't hear what you said, Tiff.
Keisha.
Oh, I'm sorry. Hi, everyone. My name is Keisha Phoney with Blown to Perfection Balloon Decor.
Katie.
I'm Katie McKnight with Butler County RTA.
Sandy. Sandy.
Good morning, Sandy Kusnoff with Frank's Glass.
Nancy.
Good morning. I'm Nancy O'Neill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Jason.
Jason with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
Laura.
Laura Merrill with the Greater Hamilton Chamber.
All right. And then I think that's everyone. So Sydney, it's your turn.
Well, hey everybody, Sydney Taske, financial advisor with Edward Jones here in Hamilton. And I am excited to be here today. Thanks for coming. Good to see some familiar faces this morning. So thanks for taking some time to have coffee with us. We're excited. So you guys ready? Can jump in? Perfect. All righty, well, here we go. So I do have a participant workbook before we really dive in. It was not allowing me to put in the chat. So Laura or Jason, if either of you are able to get it to the folks on the call, that'd be great. If not, we'll talk through everything too. So either way, totally works. So if you are able to get the participant workbook, it is just a helpful guide as we're kind of talking through some different things this morning. So if you'll follow along there, I will point to a couple of different items throughout as we're kind of going through the presentation. I am going to try to share my screen here.
And Sydney, I just uploaded the PDF to the chat. So if any of the attendees want to follow along, you can just download that.
Awesome. Thanks, Jason. All right, we're going to do screen 2 here. All right. Okay. Can you all see my screen okay? All right, good deal. Perfect. All right, it is on my other monitor, so I'm not looking at you all and communicating with you guys, but I just like to share that piece just so you could know that I am paying attention. All right, get myself organized. Okay, so to get us started, I have a question for the group, especially since we've got a little bit of a smaller group. So I have we'll call it an icebreaker. So if anybody is willing to share, if I were to give you $5 million, okay? So this is going to be tax-free, no strings attached, okay? What would be something that you would do with that $5 million? So some people have said, I'd buy a boat or a pet llama or a beach house, whatever. It doesn't matter. Just something fun. Let me know. I'll take a couple of people if you wouldn't mind sharing. If I were to give you $5 million, again, tax-free, no strings attached, what would you buy?
Well, I would pay down my debt and probably buy a new home.
Ooh, nice.
And go to you for questions with what to do next.
I love it. Anybody else?
I would probably do what Katie was doing.
Nope. I love it. Nancy, did I see you too?
Yeah, I was just gonna say I would take a great trip and then look to invest so that I have more to spend on another great trip later.
I love it. Man, I like the way you people think. Awesome. Well, good. Well, thanks for just taking a minute. I like that one. I think it's a fun one. Just thinks outside the box a little bit. So thanks for sharing. Again, hang on, let me get my all right, perfect. So again, Sydney Taske, I'm with Edward Jones. Today we're going to be talking about that leaving it, moving it, rolling it, and taking it. Just different things to know about your employer retirement plan. So depending on where you fall in this category, maybe you've recently left an employer, maybe you have potential that you're looking at retiring down the road and what that might look like with your employer retirement dollars. What do we do with those and what are my options? At the end of the day, today is an opportunity for me just to give you guys just a couple of tidbits on what those options are. I also have an interesting fact for the group. So 29.2 million forgotten or left behind 401k accounts are out there. So again, 29.2 million roughly accounts are left behind. Folks just don't realize that they've either left, they've forgotten about them, or they're like, oh, well, I'll deal with that later after my life settles down. And we all know that life normally doesn't settle down. It just maybe gets a little bit crazier and folks will just leave them. And so that's, something for me is just really passionate about encouraging and just telling folks, what their options are. So really have a big heart for this presentation here because I do think it's important just to educate people on what they have the ability to do. So that's a big reason to be presenting on this topic as well. And hopefully you all get some knowledge. But like Dan said, feel free to interrupt me at any point in the conversation. I am happy to stop and answer questions throughout. So without further ado, we'll jump right in. So today, we're going to talk about this piece of, again, what do we do with those employer options? And so one of the things that, is important to think about is everybody has their own journey. So I've got this wheel up here that I'm presenting, and it talks about, where am I today? Where would I like to be? Can I get there? How do I get there? And how can I stay on track? So when we think about these different phases of just our work, of our life, and our retirement planning, short-term, long-term goals, when you're thinking about those things, we like to use this established process so that we can help folks just kind of move their way through it. It's not the only way to establish your long-term goals and looking to how do we work on those, but it is an opportunity for us in a way that we at Edward Jones really work through this wheel to help folks with this and just, again, helping them to stay on track with their goals. So if you are following along with me in the workbook, if you'll turn to page 3, that's where we're going to get started with our conversation about what your options are. Okay, so again, whether you're here because you've recently changed your employer or employment, or you're just wanting to learn more, especially if you're listening at a later time, no matter where you are in your career or what your current situation may be, it's always a great idea, again, to know what your options are so we can make the right decision. Not only for yourself, but also for your families and who you're saving for down the road. And again, perhaps you've changed your employers. Maybe you've been laid off before, or you plan to retire. Obviously, sometimes you can be offered an early out package or a retirement package. So simply just, whatever the case may be, where your situation is, I just want you to know it's totally normal to feel unsure about what it is that you might be wanting to do with those, or what to do and where you're at. And so that's where somebody like myself can help provide some education around this topic and around your situation to basically come up with a plan for you and your family. So as a big part of your comprehensive financial strategy, the assets in your employer sponsorship retirement plan are designed to be a part of your financial support for the rest of your life, right? So that's a big part of what we're looking at, and what's important, what's out there. So again, on page 4 of your workbook, that's what I'm going to be talking about as we get started. So again, we want to make sure we're here. Flip the screen here. Okay, so we got your options, right? We've got the leave it, we got the move it, we got the roll it, and we got the take it. So we're going to talk about each one of these a little bit more in detail. And what I mean by leaving it, it's just leaving the assets where they are at your maybe former employer, and just letting them ride in that scenario if you're allowed to do that. You may want to move your assets to a new employer plan. Again, if your new employer plan will allow you to do that. You may want to roll them over into an IRA, or you may want to cash out your account and get a lump sum distribution for that. So each of these options have potential opportunity, but also have trade-offs as well. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Each one of these, again, in a little bit of a greater detail. Okay. So we're going to flip to page 5 in your workbook. If you're following along on that slide there, and I'm going to move along here. So let's talk generally about the potential benefits and trade-offs you'll need to consider as you make your choices. And then again, we'll talk in greater detail for each of these options. So investment options. So what and how many investment choices do you have in your former or new employer's plan is something to consider, or in other account options like an IRA. Your advice and guidance. Will you have access to a financial advisor who can meet with you to discuss your retirement goals? This discussion, may include how much to save each year, how to invest your investment assets, or how much income you can withdraw in retirement based on your situation. Again, that's advice and guidance. You may want to consider your fees and expenses. Each of the options that we just talked about involve different fees and expenses. So it's important to consider the potential account fees, investment-related expenses, and other administrative fees that you may pay, and the impact that those could have on your long-term goals. Taxes and penalties in general, a 10% early withdrawal penalty and income taxes apply if you take money before you reach the age of 59 and a half. So unless certain conditions are met, we'll talk about that in a little bit in greater detail, but again, you could experience taxes and penalties, so it's also just good to know what is revolved around that as well. You also are going to need to know your withdrawal options, your required minimum distributions, otherwise known as RMDs. The key consideration here will be how much access you'll have to your assets and when those RMDs are required to be taken. Last, we may have some other considerations, like potentially if you're holding employer stock, and basically, are your assets protected by creditors as well? So again, those are just some options to be considering as well. Okay, we're going to flip over to page 6 now in your workbook, and we're going to get the conversation really started here by talking about leaving it and what that looks like. So our first option here is leaving your assets in your former employer's plan. Okay, if this is an option for you and you're allowed to do this after you've left an employer, you just need to check with your plan administrator to determine if this is available. If this is an option, leaving assets in your former employer's plan may avoid potential taxes and penalties until you take a distribution. So depending on the type of plan, your savings may continue to grow tax deferred or even tax free. And the longer you keep those assets invested, obviously tax deferred, the greater the potential for your investment savings to grow. In addition to the ability to defer taxes, leaving your assets with your former employer's plan may result in lower fees and expenses relative to those of an IRA. So again, just something for you to consider. Again, it's also important to note when you're leaving your assets, this is another key piece, especially if you're around this age. If you leave your employer in the calendar year that you turn 55 or later, typically you can take money from your former employer's plan and avoid that 10% penalty, withdrawal penalty that we talked about earlier. Again, because you're 59 and a half, you're prior to age 59 and a half. So if you need access to your retirement plan assets before you turn 59 and a half, you may want to consider this option for at least a portion of your assets rather than rolling all your assets to an IRA. Your employer would generally be required to withhold that 20% of the distribution for federal tax purposes. So you should also take that into consideration as well. Also, assets held in employer plans may offer a different level of creditor protection under the law than those of an IRA. So again, it would be important for you to talk with your attorney and tax professional to get insights on that particular situation, if that's something that's relative to your piece and your story there. Okay. We're going to talk about potential trade-offs with leaving, again, your funds. We're talking about leaving them at your former employer, and what, maybe some trade-offs would be if you were to do that. So for instance, if we choose to leave our assets here, okay, in your former employer's plan, you generally have less individual control than you would if you were to have your assets in an IRA. Some of those trade-offs and those limitations could be the number of investments that you have the options to invest in. And then if you need help understanding your investments, you need a plan, may offer educational materials, but you may not have access to a financial advisor to help you talk about your individual situation. So lastly, you generally won't be able to contribute to your former employer's plan once you've left your employer. So again, something to note there. And if you're not, wanting to keep contributing, or again, depending on your situation, just something for you to think about as you are leaving, and what you might want to do with those assets as well. Okay, before we jump on to move it, I am going to pause just for a quick second. Is there any questions about leaving your assets where they're at?
I'm not seeing anything in the chat.
Perfect. Oh yeah, thanks Jason for doing that.
Yeah.
All right, perfect. I'll keep moving. Okay, we're going to flip to page 7 in your workbook, and then moving here to talking about, again, moving your assets to a new employer. Okay, so here's the situation. So you've left your former employer for, whatever reason, and now you're at a new employer. Okay, now this new employer does have let's say a 401k set up. Okay, so there could be the option for you to take those old assets at your old 401k and moving those over to your new 401k. Again, it obviously depends on if your new employer will allow this. Okay, so some things to think about. Again, we're going to talk about some benefits. We're going to talk about some trade-offs with moving it. So if you're changing employers, again, there might be that option to move those over to the new employer. You'll need to check with your plan administrator of your new employer's plan to determine if this is an option for you. Many of the benefits of moving your asset to this new employer plan are similar to if you were to leave them, but here's a couple things to consider. Okay, you can avoid potential taxes and penalties when you move your retirement assets to your new employer's plan. Okay, moving assets to your new employer's plan may result in lower fees and expenses, again, relative to those of an IRA. If you leave your employer in the calendar year that you turn 55 or later, typically you can take money from your new employer's plan and avoid that 10% early withdrawal penalty that normally would apply if you were to take a withdrawal prior to age 59 and a half. Again, just something to consider there. Assets held in employer plans may offer a different level of creditor protection under the law than those held in an IRA. Again, your attorney and tax professional can provide more insight on this specific situation here for you. Some additional benefits with moving it. This option does add the potential for consolidating and holding your accounts together so you don't have accounts all over the place or forget about it down the road, right? Having your retirement assets with a single firm may make it easier to manage your assets and determine if you're staying on track to reach those retirement goals that you have. And if you plan to work past the age in which that required minimum distribution is held, which right now it's at 73, you generally don't have to take an RMD from your current employer's plan while still working. Okay. That's an important note for people that are planning to work a little bit longer. All right, let's talk about a couple of the trade-offs here. So again, with all of these options, just like we talked about, there's going to be potential trade-offs with each of them. And essentially, you need to weigh out what your benefits and trade-offs, which one aligns best with your situation and what makes the most sense for you. So again, a trade-off is you may have less control over your assets than you would if they were to be in an IRA. The number and type of investment options in the employer plan are typically more limited compared to those available to an IRA. And you may have limited access or no access to a financial advisor who can meet with you to advise you on your unique situation. Again, just something to think about and making sure to see if this applies to you or not. Alrighty. Before we start to move on to talking about, we're going to talk about the next one of rolling it to an IRA. We're going to talk a little bit more about what an IRA is to get that conversation started. But again, any questions about moving it, if you were to move it to a new employer plan? Also, give me a second to have a sip of my coffee too.
I don't see any questions on Facebook, and I don't see any in the chat. Or we have one in the chat. Is there typically a time frame it needs to be moved by?
Yeah, good question. That's something I would check with your plan administrator at your former employer. It would be good to know that piece from them. Typically, there's not a, generally there's not a rule of thumb that says, you've got to move it by X date. Something I will note though, like if you have this intention of moving it, you're going to want to make sure that you've had your last paycheck at that former employer first, so that all of your contributions are accounted for before making that move out. So just something to think about. But that's the only real consideration would be making sure you've actually given it enough time to receive all of your benefits from your former employer first. Good question. Perfect. All right, well, let's keep this thing moving. So we're going to talk about, again, what is an IRA? That's where we're going to start this piece of talking about rolling it to an IRA. So before we discuss about the potential benefits and trade-offs of rolling into an IRA, we're going to first talk about how an IRA works, okay? So I also like to preface this too. An IRA stands for an individual retirement account, okay? So like your employer plan, an IRA is a retirement account that allows you to save retirement on a tax-deferred basis. You can have an IRA in addition to your plan at work. Okay, so again, you can be participating in both. And you may have heard that IRAs, there's actually two types of IRAs. There's a traditional IRA and there's a Roth IRA. Does anybody know the difference between the two types of accounts? Not to put anybody on the spot. Yeah, Nancy, what you got for me?
The Roth IRA is the taxes are taken out, so you don't have to pay taxes when you take the money out. So you're putting in post-tax dollars, I guess it is.
Exactly
Is that
right. You got it. If I had a cookie or something to treat you with, you would. And here's my in-person or my virtual treat.
Thank you.
No, you're perfect. If you're following along in the workbook, there is actually a little section here on page 8, but you're exactly right, Nancy. So traditional IRA, those are there's tax deferred growth there. So similar to your 401k. So that's your pre-tax bucket. So exactly right. Those assets are going in pre-taxed, okay? And they're growing on a tax deferred basis. For a Roth IRA, those assets, again, as Nancy said, are going to go in after tax, and they're going to grow tax free. And there's some potentials there for those to also be withdrawn tax free as well. So we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. Okay, let's talk about the traditional IRA. So again, your traditional IRA is designed to grow tax deferred. So this means you don't have to pay taxes on your investments while they are growing inside your account. Traditional IRA contributions may be tax deductible depending on your income and whether you and your spouse participate in an employer retirement plan. However, you don't get out of paying taxes altogether, unfortunately, as long I know that we all would like that. But instead, you're going to pay income tax on your traditional IRA dollars when you take a distribution from that account. Okay. So although you can take a traditional IRA distribution at any time, you'll have to pay again that 10% penalty if you are at the age of 59 and a half, younger than 59 and a half. Okay. Unless you qualify for an exception. So there are several exceptions that may excuse this penalty, such as a disability for medical insurance premiums, unreimbursed medical expenses, or using the funds for higher education expenses. But again, certain requirements may have to be met to qualify for those. So again, it's just important to speak with somebody about that before pulling those out, making sure you're getting the right guidance there. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about a Roth IRA. So similar to the traditional IRA, assets held in a Roth IRA are not taxable. So the dollars you contribute are not tax deductible. Okay, so again, that's going in after taxes, what that means. But you also don't have to pay taxes on your investments while they are inside your account. Okay. And if you meet certain requirements, you won't pay any taxes on your distributions. In fact, you can generally access your contributions for income after 5 years without penalty. So as long as they're in that account and they're working for you for 5 years, if you were to start to pull out distributions after that time frame, then you will not have to pay a penalty, even if you're not 59 and a half yet. Okay. There are also no RMDs, or again, required minimum distributions for the original account holder with a Roth IRA. Okay. Clients who select to this rollover option for their employer plan assets typically roll over to a traditional IRA. So this is the option we're going to focus on today. If you have further questions about a traditional versus a Roth, please feel free to let me know. I'm happy to answer those as well. Okay, we're going to jump to page 9 in your workbook, and we're going to talk about rolling it to an IRA. Okay, so one of the potential trade-offs, excuse me, I think I flipped. Sorry, I got that changed up there. Okay, so one of the potential trade-offs, here we go, trade-offs with an IRA is that generally have higher fees and expenses than an employer plan. Okay. An IRA fees often include an annual account fee, as well as an investment related fees and expenses. Your plan administrator can provide you with information about your employer plan fees because there's still fees around those employer plans. So it's important to, again, weigh the difference on those options to see what makes the most sense for you. There are also differences as to when you can start taking withdrawals without that 10% penalty, like we've been talking about, depending on your age. And then also you must start taking those RMDs from a traditional IRA beginning at age 73. Again, but in your employer plan, you can delay RMDs until you've left that employer. Okay. Lastly, assets held in an employer plan of those held in an IRA may have different levels of protection from creditors under law. So it's really important that you consult with an attorney and tax professional as well as you're thinking about this, okay? If you just decide to roll over to an IRA, it's important to understand the two ways you can do it. You can do it as a direct or indirect. So basically it depends on to whom that check is made payable to determine if it's a direct or indirect rollover. So we're going to talk about that for a minute as well. There's also a little page on page 10, some more information, a little activity if you're interested in following along here as well. So we're going to talk about this first column first. So doing a direct rollover. So with a direct rollover, that check or the certificates are made payable to the IRA trustee or custodian for your benefit. So here's an example. Let's say you're doing a direct rollover from a previous employer and you're moving that to that IRA, that check is going to be made payable to, here's just an example, made payable to Edward Jones, FBO, which means for benefit of John Smith. Okay, so that's just an example of how that means for a direct rollover. Okay, the benefits of rolling over the money directly is that you're going to, again, avoid that 20% withholding. You're going to avoid taxes and penalties on that piece because you're not actually cashing those dollars and putting them in your pocket. Okay. So if your distribution check is made payable to you, so this is going to be that indirect rollover. Okay. You can still roll it over to a traditional IRA. However, you do lose some benefits of the direct rollover. So here's some things to think about if you do this. Okay, first, your employer must withhold 20% of the distribution, and you may owe taxes and possibly a 10% penalty if you do not roll the distribution, including the withholding amount, to an IRA within 60 days. So that's what's really important here, is just making sure that you are taking into consideration if you have that check made payable to you in your name, you're doing something with it within 60 days. Okay, it's really important that you do something with that quickly. All right. We are going to talk about taking it. So we're going to move to page 11 in the workbook. And this is where we're going to hit on this last piece about taking the resources and what this looks like here. So you could receive a lump sum from your retirement plan. And I know, you guys may, be tempted to wanting to pay some bills or buy something. Some of you wanted to take some lavish trips. If I were to give you $5 million, right? Buy a motorcycle, who knows, vacation home, right? So it seems tempting to pull those monies out. But again, it's important that you make sure you understand those trade-offs and those potential benefits there too. So let's talk about that for a minute. So taxes are a big part of this decision. So if you choose to take the distribution, your employer is generally required to withhold that 20% of federal income taxes that we've talked about, and you'll generally be required to pay income taxes on the distribution in the tax year that you take it. Okay. In addition, if you're under the age of 59 and a half, you're going to likely have to pay a 10% early tax penalty unless you qualify for specific exceptions like we've talked about. Okay. So let's look at this. So if I am 59 and a half or older, again, I'm taking this distribution. Okay. I'm just pulling out the lump sum of the cash. So let's say our balance of the plan was $100,000. Okay. And you're in the 24% tax bracket. You're going to owe $24,000 in taxes because of the lump sum distribution was paid directly to you. So your take home is about $76,000 in this example. Okay. Well, let's say, I'm not quite 59 and a half. So what does this look like for me? So if you're younger than 59 and a half, you may have to pay that 10% penalty that we've talked about for the distribution. So that's going to leave you with that $66,000 of the $100,000 you accumulated in your retirement account. So again, just something for you to consider. Obviously, that's a pretty large chunk of money to pay out in taxes. But again, if you need to know what your specific situation is and to see what makes sense there. So let's talk about, for example, or another piece here is the power of tax deferral and what that looks like. This gives you a general idea of why this might not be the best choice. So again, in that second example, you're under the age of 59 and a half, you're going to pay $34,000 to the IRS. Okay, so again, something to think about. And you also may not get the benefits of those tax deferral, again, which is one of the hallmarks of investing in a retirement plan. So again, just something to consider. These are all just different things for you to be thinking about. All right, I'm going to skip over this piece for employer stock. This is not necessarily super common, but if this does apply to you and you have questions about what happens if I have employer stock within my 401k or within my employer plan, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to talk about this at a little bit more detail if you would like for me to. Similarly, for anybody that may have a pension, This is just something also to think about. When you end your employment, regardless of the reason for why you leave, you may have the option to receive a lump sum or monthly pension, which may also be called an annuity. Okay. This is going to be on page 12 of your workbook, again, if you're following along with me. A monthly pension is a great concept because it can provide a lifetime of income for you and possibly your spouse. Okay. It's also predictable, so you'll know exactly how much you'll receive each month. It can pose a problem, though, because most monthly pensions do not adjust for inflation. So here's a little fact. Historically, the inflation rate has been about 3%. So if you spend 25 to 30 years in retirement, your expenses could double during that time. So again, just something to think about with this particular option. Pensions also may not provide benefits to your heirs. So if a joint option is selected, a spouse will receive the distribution once the participant passes away, but the checks are usually for less than when the participant was alive. Okay. So again, just thinking about all of your options and what that looks like if you were to take those resources. Okay. Any questions around taking it, what that looks like? I'm working on landing this plane, so I've got get ready to jump to the summary, but any questions on this area specifically? All right, perfect. So just to wrap it up here, so again, your options are leaving it, move it, roll it, take it. So it's really important that you know what your options are, what is available to you, and what do you do with it. And so, remember that not all retirement plans allow you to leave your assets behind after you leave the employer or move assets from your former employer to the new employer plan. You'll need to check with your plan administrator for both of those companies to see if that's an option for you. Again, thirdly, you may be able to roll over those plan assets to an IRA. All three of these options, leaving it, moving it, and rolling it, allow you to continue to save for your long-term needs tax deferred, which is a great option, just something important for you. Or finally, you can receive a lump sum distribution. Again, that's going to be subject to those tax consequences that we talked about as we were wrapping up that last section. So whether you leave it, move it, roll it, or take it, the key is to understand your options and decide based on what is most important to you. Each option offers potential benefits and trade-offs like we've talked about, which is also shown in that packet as well. So it's really important that you have that ability to know, what's going on and where your options are and how it's going to affect you in your long-term planning for your financial goals. So I am landed. So thank you so much for just listening and paying attention and giving me an opportunity to speak with you about this topic. If you have any questions, I'm open to anything. Feel free to let me know if there's anything that I didn't cover that you were hoping I was going to cover in this presentation. I'm happy to answer questions the best that I can.
Sydney, we don't have a question, but we do have an affirmation. So Katie Wright of BCRTA said, Sydney is a wealth of information. If you're feeling overwhelmed or unsure about your financial future, she is an incredible resource. She left her first meeting with you feeling more confident and far less behind than when she went in, and she highly recommends reaching out to you.
Thank you so much. That means a lot. I'm really, hopefully you can see that in the presentation today, but really passionate about this space and just helping individuals, making sure that, they're putting a plan together, that's going to be a benefit to you and for your family. So if there's anything that I can do, even if it's just being a resource, if you just want to call, ask me a question or anything like that, here's my information. I am happy to just be that resource if there's anything that I can be doing. So thank you.
Awesome. Sydney, that was super, super helpful. And I loved the interactivity with the workbook. I printed out some for our team and we were following along as you went along. Very, very insightful. Thank you so much for doing this today. We have a few events coming up, and keep in mind, I'm going to be sending a recap to all the attendees today with the workbook attached. Some of the upcoming events that we have going on, we have a Fit Wellness, the Welcome Table with Inspiration Studios, March 28th at Cohatch. It's going to be an inclusive wellness event. On the 28th, we also have Nora Fleming is doing a signing of all of her items at the store Flourish in Hamilton. We also have a multi-chamber after hours at the Oscar Event Center on March 31st. You do not want to miss. And then we also have April 23rd, we have Fighting Fraud in the Age of AI, and that's going to be at Butler Tech's Adult Campus. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. If you would like to present at a coffee and conversation and help the business community, please let us know. We have a few spots coming up in the following months. Everyone, have a wonderful day, and thanks for joining us. Bye, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thanks.